Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get started momentarily. There's still a lot of people making their way out of the waiting room.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. So great to see so many familiar and new names as you're joining.
Yeah, and I think just as we wait another minute or so, I'd love to hear where everyone is joining from.
Yeah, we have some people already chiming in. Calgary, Seattle, California, New York City. A few Canadians. I'm sure it's very cold.
Actually felt a little cold in New York the past couple days.
Texas, Michigan, Louisiana, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I see some folks from Colorado too, Denver and Fort Collins. From Colorado originally, so shout out. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and get things started. I know that there's still going to be some people joining us, but I just want to say hello, happy holidays. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dolan, and I am with the Education Department at the Tenement Museum. And I'm really here to present the specialty holiday program this evening, but not alone. You've already met my good friend and colleague, Grace, who is also one of our virtual tour presenters. But I am going to turn it over to Grace just to say hi and go over the ground rules for how the program is going to work tonight. Hi, Grace.
Hi, thank you so much, Dolan. So good, whatever time zone you're in. Good evening, good morning, good day. We're so happy to have you. Just a couple logistics to kind of go over before we get started. We're at about 175 people so far. There is still some joining. So we're in a webinar format, which means your cameras are off. There's no way to change that. But you can feel free to use the chat function on Zoom at any point to share or ask questions. I'll do my best to maybe answer some or pass them off to Dolan. We can, or if you need any tech support, we can do that in the chat. We might have time at the end for more questions. This is being recorded, mostly for our own purposes at the museum. So if you heard a recording in progress when you joined, that's what that is. And we also have closed captioning available for this. So if you would like to turn that on or off, you can click, sometimes it's CC live transcript or more, and then show subtitle or hide subtitle. It is done by a robot, so it's not completely perfect, but it can be helpful. And I think that's about it. Did I forget anything, Dolan?
Nope. I will say the recording is also available upon request, so it should be available next week if you do want to request a copy of it, or if you have to leave early or something. All right. So if you're ready, I'm going to go ahead and pull up the title screen of the program. Okay. Sorry, just gonna make sure. Okay. Okay. How's that looking so far, Grace? Awesome. So once again, welcome to this specialty holiday program. Christmas in the Tenements, 1868. And if you've joined us for a Tenement Museum virtual program or an insight tour of one of our historic sites, you know that a big part of the Tenement Museum's mission is exploring history through stories of real people. And we like to really understand how time periods or events were seen and felt and understood by the actual families who lived in the tenements of the Lower East Side throughout its history. This is a neighborhood that has been home to newcomers in many different ways from many different backgrounds. And we're going to really focus in on two families who lived in the building together from very different parts of the world, who arrived maybe for different reasons and would have been celebrating Christmas in 1868 in their tenement apartment kitchens and parlors in 97 Orchard Street. And before I really get into their story, I do want to pose a question, and I think we can just spend a couple minutes if something comes to mind for you and you have an answer for this. I'd love to know, what's a holiday tradition you and your family have always observed? Or if you'd like, what is a holiday tradition that you've had to change and why, if you want to share? So I'm going to give some time for you guys to add those answers in the chat if you'd like. I think that these are a really great way to understand how both the Schneider and Moore families might be feeling about their Christmas observance in the year 1868. But as you guys think that over, I do want to just explain a little bit more about the museum, right? So this is 97 Orchard Street. And over here, this is 103 Orchard Street. So two buildings on the same block. And these are our two historic sites where we recreate the homes and tell the stories of the inhabitants. 97 Orchard is the older building, built in 1863 by a German tailor named Lucas Glockner, and inhabited until 1935 when it was condemned and discovered over 50 years later by the Tenement Museum's founders. So when we examine life in the building in 1868, just know this building is still pretty new, right? It's only been open for about 4 or 5 years. And 103 Orchard Street, built in 1888, occupied until fairly recently. So these two buildings really allow us to tell stories of the neighborhood and the people who made that neighborhood a home and a community from the mid-19th century to the present day. So actually keep 103 in mind, because even though we're not going to spend too much time there, a resident from 103 is going to kind of end the tour today. All right, we'll play some Christmas memories from someone who lived in that building. But yeah, anything coming up in the chat, Grace?
Yes, sorry. So we've had a lot. So Royal Oak, Michigan, watching Die Hard, of course, lighting the menorah, having special foods, Christmas cookies, candles, going to mass, candlelight services, also advent calendars. Lori has something to share about her grandfather who would go out and Christmas Eve night and find two like half Christmas trees and kind of glue them together. So I told her we might talk about that. Giving gifts. We're also talking a bit about how maybe we used to something to adapt to is like hosting Christmas Eve, but then if family members pass away, things really change. And if you move, things really change. Yeah,
I like thinking about, as we experience a lot of change in our lives, and I think the last 2 years was a great way to kind of think about the challenges that sudden changes can bring to our, cherished traditions. I know I was stuck at home with COVID. Christmas had to abruptly cancel a bunch of plans, but yeah, just thinking about the ways that a lot of people. But the ways that we could figure out ways to hold on to traditions, but also be okay with maybe bending some things and adapting. And both the Schneiders and Moore families are going to experience, very similar, challenges, right? So I do want to just kind of bring us into their story, and their story has a lot to do with 97 Orchard Street here. So, tenements are a really interesting form of architecture and housing. For a lot of people, it's a very negative word. But going back to the 1860s, this actually would be a huge step up for a lot of working class immigrant and migrant families entering New York City. Tenements are really buildings built by immigrants for immigrants who are experiencing the kind of crunch of a housing crisis in New York City. During our first era of mass immigration, the population of New York will increase about 4 times. It almost quadruples in about 30 years, necessitating these new buildings, tenements, which in a lot of ways are just apartments, right? So our building, built in 1863, among the first in the neighborhood, or this part of the neighborhood. But you can see on the block other tenements follow quite rapidly, and they are really going to anchor New York City's first large non-English speaking immigrant community, which would have been called Kleindeutschland. And so in 1868, we're really at kind of nearing the peak of the neighborhood's history as a German immigrant enclave. And we have some images of, kind of the streets and the neighborhood. So here we have just sort of a typical street scene during the day. You might notice it's very busy. There's a lot of people, a lot of activity. And, by 1868, the neighborhood is fast becoming not just an immigrant enclave in New York City or the United States, but one of the largest German communities on earth. By the early 1870s, it would have been considered the 5th largest German population in the entire world. And to the north, so there's actually Ludlow and Houston. We're actually seeing some of the architectural transformations occurring by the late 1870s and 1880s, but still not the kind of infrastructure in all ways that are keeping up with that housing growth, right? No garbage collection regularly, streets are not being taken care of, right? New York City is still really in a boom period when we're going to look at Christmas celebrations in 1868. So we're going to start with the Schneiders, and we're going to visit their home. We're going to tell you what we know about them. And of course, wouldn't be a tenement museum tour if we also didn't talk about what we don't know and what we have to speculate and what that might mean. But before I get into their story, are there any questions in the chat?
There's been a lot of great sharing about different traditions, especially in ways that we have to adapt.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a question from Richard about if Christmas Day or Eve was a day off or was it a work day? What about Hanukkah? So I was trying to clarify, if we're talking about the 1860s, it really depends on the profession. So Christmas doesn't become a federal holiday until 1870, which is actually kind of right around the moment we're talking about. And for Hanukkah, because religiously it's not observed to be days of rest except for the Sabbath, there would be a lot of work going on. And we can think about both for the Schneiders and especially for Bridget Moore in different moments of their life, they're probably working during the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
yes, there is a question too. These are real families we're going to talk about who used to live in our tenements.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah, I was just about to say for Bridget Moore and Caroline Schneider, they are definitely working during the holidays. Yeah. Yeah, real families and celebrating Christmas in their homes at a time where Christmas as a holiday that we might recognize it today in 2022 really is taking shape, right? And I really do love this illustration of Santa Claus visiting the tenements in Christmas. I don't think this was an intentional part of the illustration, but you see how he's just sort of walking away from the religious part of the holiday over here, and it's just kind of fading into the background. And yeah, it's really it's a holiday that's becoming in the United States more of a secular holiday, something that everybody can celebrate, rich, poor, immigrant or American born. And
Or
so yeah,
maybe he's walking too far away, so like the Magi are confused and they're searching
yeah,
for him, if that's who they
that's
are.
true. Yeah. So just to kind of talk a very brief history of Christmas, because, a thorough history is not necessarily something we have time for. But, in essence, Christmas is the celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ, most notably the Nativity, right, which we see here from this painting from the early 1300s. and the Feast of the Epiphany, which is the arrival of the Magi on January 6th, seen here in actual a 4th century artwork here, over here. So despite the fact that this is celebrating the birth of the central figure of Christianity, it really was not a holiday for the first couple centuries of the church being established. It's the 4th century where the church actually recognizes Christmas, right, Christ's Mass, and picks the date of December 25th. And prior to that, the celebration really was the Feast of the Epiphany, right? The arrival of the Magi, the bestowing of the gifts on the infant Christ child. And so there's a lot of stories about how this date was picked, right? Some people say that it was kind of working backwards from, January 6th, right? Roughly it would be December 25th when he was born. Other people also saying this happened to be the time of the winter solstice, a lot of other celebrations going on, and you know, probably this was a date that was practiced unofficially by early Christians, and the church was kind of giving it sanction, but also, putting a holiday right in that really, really big, important part of the year where there'd be a lot of other holidays for winter solstice. And so as Christianity grows and diversifies, practices around Christmas really diversify as well. For a long time in the Middle Ages, it was really kind of a raucous, carnival-esque season, right? About a month from, early December until the Feast of the Epiphany. And, various church traditions and, officials really tried to control the holiday or even get rid of it altogether, right? Sometimes it was considered a little too pagan, a little too Catholic. And, kind of the height of that is the Puritans who really saw it as something to be avoided. And so early on, that was very much the attitude in the United States towards Christmas, right? It was frivolous. It was not an actual, religious feast day. We know Massachusetts for a period of time even banned public celebrations of Christmas. But that'll start to shift and change in the 19th century. And so, first of all, we start to get Christmas being the subject of a lot of very important works of literature, of poetry. And we start to see Christmas featured in a lot of works of art in the Victorian era. So we have, of course, A Christmas Carol, published in the 1840s, and the poem The Night Before Christmas, which was actually published anonymously originally in an upstate New York newspaper. The original title was An Account of a Visit of St. Nicholas or something like that, so they tweaked it. But yeah, it's also becoming very popular in the 1830s and 40s. Christmas cards, such as this one, are becoming popular seasonal gifts, right? Very affordable. The post is becoming more of a consistent, reliable thing. So, sending Christmas cards to loved ones abroad and in different parts of the country becoming more of a practice. And so we're starting to get this kind of visual culture around Christmas and this kind of unified idea of how the holiday is supposed to be celebrated in the United States. But there'd be a lot of regional variation. It really is in sort of the Northeast where this idea of Santa Claus coming and visiting and giving you gifts, that kind of survived from, the Dutch period of New Amsterdam and that area, and was sort of being adopted in private Christmas celebrations and now being popularized by, poetry and works of literature. But all of this process of kind of Christmas coming together gets a real big shot in the arm from an unusual source, the Civil War. And political cartoonists like Thomas Nast, who begin to use this kind of romanticized Christmas, talking about how soldiers fighting in the Union Army, deserve donations around Christmas time. A lot of stories, a lot of images of, soldiers on the front missing their wife and kids, and the wife and kids at home celebrating Christmas and hoping that their father comes home. And again, we start to see a lot more of this kind of domestic celebration, right? Christmas trees and toys and, feasting. Um, and, I'll pull this political cartoon from January of 1863 is a really great example. It's actually the first time Santa Claus, in the way that we know him, right? So it's kind of taking this Dutch, elf that would come and visit on Christmas Eve and the German Saint Nicholas and turning it into Santa Claus. But yeah, this is the first time he is visually represented in the United States, right? And he's represented as visiting the Union Army, passing out gifts, including this toy here, which is a toy of Confederate President Jefferson Davis that is on a string, and he's making him jump around and dangle there. So after the Civil War, Christmas really becomes seen as this way to kind of unify the country and heal these wounds. And again, more of these kind of Northeastern traditions kind of take prominence through mass media of the time. And I'm going to pause here because I feel like I've been talking for very, very long. But yeah, any questions or any thoughts?
There was a question earlier that I see that other people can't because of the settings. Would Bridget have decorated a tree in her apartment? And while we're not quite talking about Bridget yet, I was responding that
A good question.
more often it would be holly, which is very fascinating. But if she was learning from her German neighbors like the Schneiders, maybe, but she's also going to see it all around New York City and in the Lower East Side. And so there's another question, any food traditions that might have started then?
Let's talk about it. Yeah, really, really excellent questions. And again, we don't know a lot of specifics, right? There's a lot of you know, what we talk about, we have to kind of speculate, but I think it's really fun to imagine that, yeah, this Irish immigrant woman who, growing up in Ireland did not have Christmas trees around, might, be decorating a tree with her kids in her 1868, brand new apartment in a German neighborhood. So yeah, when the United States decides we're really going to make this a national holiday, um, they need source material, right? And so this huge spike in immigration from Ireland and Germany and a lot of other countries, but those two the largest number of, or the largest proportion, excuse me, of immigrants arriving in the 1820s, 30s into the 1860s and 70s. They're going to have all of these traditions that are going to be very popularized, right? We already see Santa Claus, the idea that there's this being that shows up seemingly with very little to no connection with the actual story of the nativity, who is responsible for giving gifts. And as we're going to see also, Christmas trees, holly, a lot of other things that would have been practiced in immigrant homes as these kind of traditional Christmas celebrations are going to just kind of become part of the national observation of the holiday. And I think it's interesting that, the Civil War has such a connection to that because, John Schneider, who we'll talk about next, is a Union Army veteran and a huge portion of the Union Army, some estimates say up to 50%, were actually foreign born. So, there's probably a lot of American soldiers who are in the Army with their immigrant compatriots being introduced to certain ideas about Christmas that they are then taking home as well. So the Schneiders, all right, this is the census of 1870, where we actually first see them. John Schneider, his wife Carolina, and there's a woman named Katerina Schwab living with them, working as a servant. We see Caroline, it says keeping house, which basically just means housework, although, I have a bone to pick with that designation, as we'll see shortly, right? And it says John Schneider is a lager beer dealer. We're very excited to see that because that really helped us understand what was going on in the commercial space down in the basement, right? Tenements are typically mixed use. And so there would be one or two shops in the basement. And this told us that there was actually a lager beer saloon in the basement of 97 when it first opens up. So this was a sign printed at the time. So perhaps John would go to a sign maker, pick out a sign like this, write the name of his saloon here at the top, and hang it in the window, right? And everything about the sign is meant to catch the eye of German immigrants in New York City or other cities with large German populations, right? We're seeing beer spelt in the German way. We are seeing, kind of symbols of German nationalism, and we're seeing over here a man, his wife, and baby all drinking beer, which was a big part of the German drinking culture, right? Germans were arriving in large numbers, as I mentioned in the first part of the 19th century. They are building communities like Klein Deutschland, and they're moving to United States where the drinking culture would be unrecognizable to a lot of us today, right? Americans are drinking spirits more than beer. It's men only in the saloons, and typically drinking establishments are places of gambling and vice, right? Not places with good reputations. And all the Germans are coming from different German states and regions and principalities, right? There's no Germany yet. But one unifying aspect of their cultures is that they have a rich tradition of brewing beer and enjoying it in fun, festive, family-friendly beer halls and saloons. And so this is a map of two sections of the Lower East Side. And every black dot that you see is meant to be a drinking establishment. So by some estimates, there were 726 of these saloons active in the neighborhood. And that one circled in red right there, that's 97 Orchard, where the Schneiders were running their saloon. Eventually, they're going to run this business for a total of 22 years together as a married couple. Another document we have is actually the announcement here, printed on November 11th of 1864 in the New Yorker Stadtzeitung, announcing to the community the opening of John and Caroline's saloon. It tells us a little bit about them, right? He mentions the honorable bandsman, which is actually a reference to Union Army musicians, just like John himself. And this part in the bottom is very intriguing to me, and I'm sure newspaper readers in Klein Deutschland in 1864. A superb lunch, that means a free lunch. So you can imagine a map like this, it's more than just a place to drink and get drunk, right? These are places to go, enjoy beer, enjoy music, enjoy food, enjoy the company of your fellow German immigrants, maybe introduce your children to certain recipes and traditions that they're not used to being born in the United States. And so it makes them, in my opinion, the ideal places to go and spend the holidays, right? Now that superb lunch is pretty significant because John is running the bar and welcoming people and pouring drinks and, a lot of other things, but it's Caroline who is actually cooking all the food. So here is the superb lunch, the free lunch table, and this, what we're seeing here is actually the museum's recreation of their saloon in the 1860s. And so you'd go in and you'd buy a beer and say hi to John over here at the front. And then you'd make your way over here to the free lunch table. And through this door, as we'll see in just a moment, that's actually the Schneider's home. So they lived in the apartment in the back, middle room there. That's Caroline's kitchen, where she's preparing all of these German staples to serve here. And this is a set of stairs leading up to the upper 5 floors. So, the Schneiders would have had 20 families living above them. And on a cold, December night, you don't even have to go outside to go down to have a drink with the Schneiders. You could go right down the set of stairs. So you can imagine how this saloon would really be like the living room in a lot of ways for the community of the building. Okay, I'm going to pause here just to see if there are any questions or thoughts before I move on.
Yeah, there was a question that I realized that I answered, but not everyone saw the question about why were the Germans immigrating, and it's like a number of reasons. How diverse are these neighborhoods? Are the buildings, and especially ethnically mixed specifically? And then we're also noting maybe it hand in hand with that John's from Bavaria and Caroline or Carolina is from Prussia. Do we know where they met and married? Which I have feelings about. So go ahead.
Excellent. Yeah. So, first things first, right? One of the benefits of the museum really delving into this specific history of an individual building or collection of buildings, we get a much better sense of the actual diversity of these neighborhoods over time, right? The idea of kind of an ethnic enclave or an immigrant neighborhood, past and present, we often tend to sort of simplify them, maybe treat it as a monolith. There's actually a lot more diversity within and among these communities, right? So we know even though the neighborhood is heavily German, 30% of the neighborhood wasn't, right? And so we have immigrants from other parts of the world. We know that there would have been, you know, Americans there. We know that there would have been a Black population there, both immigrants from the Caribbean, but also migrants from other parts of the United States. So yeah, we actually get to see, a very different picture than we might imagine of just this singular community. But yeah, as Grace alluded to, the Germans are not seeing themselves as one community either, right? They're keenly aware of the differences between Bavaria and Prussia and Westphalia and Hanover and all these places. Um, what's the statistic? It's been a while since I've trotted this out, but what is it? 80% of Germans married within the region of their birth in Kleindeutschland?
Yeah, it's about 75%
75%.
of Germans in New York married within their own city state. And if you expand that to a broader region, it's more like 90%,
Gotcha. Yeah.
something like that.
So yeah, John and Caroline would have been considered an unusual match for the time, right? As an immigrant from two different German states and different regions of modern day Germany. And again, like I said, we have a lot of records of John, his experience, his military service, running this business. We don't have as many records for Caroline, right? But we know she must have been a really big part of why this business stays open for 22 years. Again, all of those dots on the map we saw, the beer isn't all that different, but the food, that's the big draw, right? So she has to appeal to the tastes of all these Germans from all these different regions, and she has to make a lot of food. It has to be good, it has to be authentic, has to be filling, and also for the purposes of her business, salty, right? So this is a typical spread of, kind of a free lunch table during the day where we have sausages and pretzels and hard-boiled eggs and, really rich, thick black breads, butters and mustards and sauerkraut and cheeses. And, one of the really, really popular items is right in the middle there, and it's actually pickled pig's knuckles. Whenever urban archaeologists have excavated trash middens from Little Germany, they just find tons and tons and tons and tons of these pig knuckles that have been gnawed on. It's kind of like a chicken wing, basically, at a bar today, right? So yeah, Caroline is a big part of the success of this business typically, and even more so on the holidays, right? Because the Germans, back in their home countries, although their traditions were very different across the German-speaking world, they really celebrated Christmas. So we can see in some accounts of what Kleindeutschland was like in the late 1860s and 1870s, what some of these traditions were, right? And so, first of all, we actually see that there was a Christmas market that was set up. And this is a huge and very common tradition across Germany, right? These Christmas markets selling gifts, but also, Christmas decorations and things like that. But also be vendors with food and drink and things like that. So, this is an account of someone visiting Kleindeutschland in 1869, the following year, right? So toys of every contrivance adorn the stands above Canal Street. The dealers in these articles are strong, able-bodied men who prefer to stand on the sidewalk, pulling the strings of a jumping jack or making contortions with a toy contrived for that purpose to a more manly way of earning their bread. Towards Christmas, large booths for the sale of toys are erected on some of the east and west side streets, at which a thriving business in toys and fireworks is carried on. So fireworks not quite as much a Christmas practice today. We also see other practices that were kind of left behind, unfortunately, in my opinion. So these are from the New York Times describing Kleindeutschland celebrations of Christmas in 1870. Among our German citizens, the German Christmas customs survive unchanged. Perhaps most of them have become national with us. The Catholic Santa Claus, with his servant Ruprecht, who punishes bad boys, come to distribute nuts and candies on December 6th. So unfortunately, there's a whole host of other Christmas characters that are part of celebrations across the world, Krampus being one of the most famous ones. And so we see in 1871, this was still something the Germans were doing in Lower Manhattan, not one that really survived over the generations, right? As it became more of a national American holiday, they kind of got rid of the, the devils and monsters that were also part of Santa Claus's or Saint Nicholas's retinue. And we also see here in the original German depiction, he is much, much more like a Catholic saint than the Santa Claus character he becomes in the United States. So yeah, the celebrations in Germany really do start generally in the very, very beginning of the month of December, and they go all the way to the Feast of the Epiphany. And December 6th is a really big day. That's where the kids will put out their shoes for St. Nicholas to visit and add candies and toys, and that's part of the gift-giving tradition. We also know across the German-speaking world, there would be kind of a period of fasting a little bit of a Lenten observance, right, of the Advent season, but really just to make the big feasts later on in the season much more festive and enjoyable. And of course, the big enduring contribution of German immigration to American Christmas is the Christmas tree. Right. So again, I really like this quote because I think it can help us imagine a little bit about how John and Caroline might be celebrating Christmas in Kleindeutschland. Among the Germans, Sunday was a busy day in making preparations for Christmas Eve, which is a German family and children's festival. The feature of this is always the brilliantly illuminated Christmas tree, decorated with toys, confectionery, and holiday gifts for the young. The places of amusement in the Bowery, the beer saloons, and other public places were decorated with Christmas trees, and many of these places were illuminated in the evening. So the question of would John and Caroline close their business for Christmas? No. It's probably a very big day of business for them, right? So they would have a Christmas tree and decorations, and their saloon would be open late in the night and probably early the next morning for their friends and neighbors and family members to go and, celebrate a proper German Christmas. Again, in that fun, festive beer hall atmosphere, and probably enjoying some holiday specialties that Caroline would be preparing. Okay. Anything coming up in the chat?
Yeah, there's some discussion just about like this space of this commercial kind of place in our building, but also questions about that kind of diversity. So were they mostly Protestants, Catholic? Was there still kind of this regional identity after the unification of Germany?
Yeah, there was, right? And so there were definitely these practices that continue. And again, in the modern nation state of Germany, you can go and see very different celebrations from one region to the next. But I think it does kind of unify a little bit more in the United States and in neighborhoods like Kleindeutschland, right? People are kind of picking and choosing what works, what's more fun, in the same way that our idea of what German cuisine is in the United States really comes from, women like Caroline trying different recipes, certain styles of pretzel or sausage that become more popular because they have mass appeal are, going to feature on these free lunch tables more often, right? And so over the years and over the generations, certainly, the Christmas traditions kind of merge, and they also join with, again, that sort of more secular national version of Christmas that's being crafted in America. So yeah, we know that there were Protestants and Catholics and German Jewish immigrants and, kind of fiercely, militantly anti-religious Germans, kind of political radicals who came over after the revolutions of 1848. And they're all here potentially all together having a beer with the Schneiders, their neighbors, and really kind of prominent members of their community on Christmas Eve.
There's also a question about, do we know about the financial backing for businesses like this?
Yeah, it came in a variety of ways. We know that many times people starting this business might take out a loan from a mutual aid society. They might pool their resources with, members of their clubs and fraternal organizations. Perhaps they were friends with the landlord who helped set them up, right? We know they both went to the same Lutheran church. So yeah, there's a variety of ways that this could get started. I'll also say, compared to the kind of initial cost of starting a business today, it's a lot lower, right? Not inexpensive, and not everybody could do it. And certainly they're paying much more rent than their upstairs neighbors. But yeah, a lot of ways to kind of, get some funding. Yeah, and it's interesting you ask that because until John and Caroline get married, we have no indication that he ever worked in a saloon, certainly never owned one. He's listed as a shoemaker in the city directories, and so it's further evidence to us that this business and its success is really the result of a partnership, right? And so I'll take us into their home just to kind of give a sense, right? They have a bedroom. They have a parlor that's, when you first open, and it's actually where, these clubs and fraternal orders and mutual aid networks would actually host meetings, right? They were, very popular organizations among Germans, and, these beer halls really were where they would meet after hours. And we have an image of, again, Caroline's kitchen. So we can imagine just how much of the day is spent in here for this woman, especially at a time without electricity, gas, running water. Just imagine the amount of labor it takes to cook a single dish, and imagine her doing it repeatedly over and over and over and over again every day to keep that free lunch table stocked and to keep her customers fed. And, of course, Christmas would be a time where she would most likely cook a roast goose, which was traditional at the time. But I think I want to talk about some drinks that they might have had at the holiday, given that they were running a saloon. We know around New Year, Bock beer was very popular. So this was a seasonal beer that, would have been popular where John was from. We know that, kind of mulled wine and spiced wine was very common. And in Caroline's part of Germany, they actually had a tradition of soaking a sugar loaf in rum and then lighting it on fire so it melted and dripped into a big bowl of mulled wine. And we do want to pull up and give you guys a chance to take a look. Another holiday favorite for Germans that likely would have been a big part of Caroline's, Christmas menu. But yeah, Glühwein. So again, it's a mulled wine, typically enjoyed around Christmas, and a pretty simple recipe that, I've made it, I've had it, it's very good, do encourage it. But yeah, just kind of imagining the taste, looking at the ingredients, yeah, feels very Christmassy. So I'm gonna move on, gonna bring the Moors into it now. And, something I imagine is, would the Moors come down and, say Merry Christmas or something to the Schneiders? Would they have been comfortable in this environment, right? We talk about diversity, and certainly, our building never had just one nationality in it, but we don't know where, quite the sort of social borders were. Maybe they were allowed but didn't feel comfortable. Maybe they thought the Christmas tree was odd. Maybe they thought the songs the Germans were singing were a little too loud. We don't know. But yeah, we know that. Okay, before I move on to them, yeah, any last thoughts or questions about the Schneiders?
Yeah, we're talking about how Glühwein is still a big part of many people's Christmas. We're wondering about Bock beer. Is it still made? Noticing the sausages. And quickly, there was a question about with this free lunch, how are they making money? It seems small. So that space actually would have been bigger than what we have here. Like it's kind of halved in the 1880s. So more tables, more chairs, but they're also open debatably, arguably 7 days a week from sun up to midnight.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. Did they ever have children? Oh, that's a great question before we move on.
Not in 1868. Yeah, we do see in the 1880 census, they're still there. They're still running that business. And they have a young son named Harry Schneider. Yeah, and unfortunately, Caroline, right, many, many years after we're talking about this, she will pass away, and John himself will pass away a few years after that. And we lose track of their son. We don't know what became of him, unfortunately. But we do know that he had a very large family. Looking at the census, we could see he had 20 nieces and nephews, John and Caroline did. And so I imagine family get-togethers around Christmas were quite large, quite festive. But yeah, we do know that their profit margins were not gigantic, right? They're making pretty much the money from the beer. But again, the food, the atmosphere, the music, that's all bringing you there and causing you to spend more money because you're there for longer. Okay, and I do want to start, I'll have this picture here. This is Jane Moore, who would have been 2 years old. Is that right? Yeah, 2 years old in 1868. So very young when she is in the building with her two sisters and parents. And I'm going to pull up a picture of, this is Jane and her husband Roger. That was the man in the portrait next to her. This is them in the 1930s. Right, those portraits we saw first were on their wedding day. And the museum was able to work with genealogists and researchers and track down the living descendants of the Moors. So here they are on a tour of the tenement where their ancestors lived. So the Moors, we know in 1868, had basically just moved, just moved to the building. Okay, here's some of the information we have about them. This is the city directory where we see Joseph P. Moore working as a waiter, H for housed at 97 Orchard. And, working backwards, we see that, he meets and marries a woman named Bridget Meehan in 1865. They have 3 children. So Mary and Jane, born in 1865 and 1866, and Agnes here, born in 1868 on October 31st. So a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and an infant when they make the move from the first address we have for them, which is down here, 65 Mott Street. This is not Klein-Deutschland. All right, so if you can see my mouse, I'm kind of tracing the borders of Klein-Deutschland over here. And they live in a neighborhood to the south, which was a little bit different, right? We're seeing the architecture here, different from the brick tenements, a lot of older wooden buildings. It's a neighborhood called the 5 Points. It's where many, many Irish families lived, but also, very diverse community. Songs from the time talk about African-American community, a Chinese community, immigrants from Italy, a Jewish community, as well as, many, many, many different sounding brogues of Irish immigrants. And the housing would have been cheaper. It would have been more simple. It's a neighborhood that has a pretty negative reputation. It's where this family it's where Bridget and Joseph start their family together before making the move first up a little bit to the north and then down to 97 Orchard. So something has brought them out of a more Irish neighborhood into a neighborhood that is more German. So they might have lived in a place like this, 1 or 2 rooms, very small, maybe a kitchen with an attached bedroom, something like that. And this is their new home in 97, right? So they have a bedroom, a kitchen, and a parlor. Not only that, they would have been moving to an apartment made of brick, a new building, a building that had clean, safe drinking water in the rear, toilets that connected to the sewer, a considerable step up from life down in the Five Points. Although something we always wonder about the family, what brought them into that German neighborhood? All right, if you have any guesses, I'd love to know in the chat. Just like the Schneiders, we don't have images of Bridget and Joseph Moore, but I do really like to bring out this picture. This is a painting that was actually painted in the 1860s, and it's meant to depict an immigrant family who have just moved into a new tenement apartment. So you see they've brought their cast iron stove. We see young children and an infant. And also, I will admit I'm a little partial to this photograph because our dress that we have for the costumed interpretation program of Bridget Moore looks exactly like that. But yeah, 1868, the family has just, perhaps late November or early December, just moved into a new part of the city, into a new home. And it'll be their first Christmas celebration with Agnes, their first Christmas celebration in this new home. And so they might really be, bringing some old Irish traditions with them. So some unique things about, Irish Christmas, especially as Bridget and Joseph might have experienced it, much like the Germans, it's not a Christmas day, it's a Christmas season, right? Starting with December 6th and going all the way to January 6th. Other than, Christmas Eve and Christmas and, certain feast days, we know that some traditions they would have centered around the day after Christmas. So St. Stephen's Day, which was December 26th. And this is where boys dressed up in bizarre costumes would go and sing songs and, basically collect money, going door to door. And it's just kind of a very rowdy tradition. And they're called the Wren Boys, and they'd sing a song about having killed a wren. The story behind this tradition is, depending on who you ask, it's either that there was a wren that alerted Roman soldiers to Saint Stephen, who was then martyred. Either that, or it was a wren that was pecking on a drum and awakened an enemy army during, an episode of kind of very early Irish history. But either way, that's a big, celebratory day. We also know that starting on Christmas Eve and going to January 6th, it was customary to put a white candle in the window. And this was said to be lighting the way for Mary and Joseph to find shelter. And it was also said to be a way that Catholic priests in Ireland could find safe harbor, right? They would know that that is a Catholic home and that they could go and find safety with that family. Grace mentioned this, right? But holly, a big part of Irish Christmas celebrations. And, most historians believe it's a practice that really goes all the way back to the Druids, but becomes Christianized, right? And the red berries are seen as the blood of Christ, the sort of crown-like aspect of the hollies, the thorns, representative of the crown of thorns, the white berries for purity. And it was taken in during December. The household would be decorated. And then on Shrove Tuesday, the following year, it would be burned to make the ashes for Ash Wednesday. So, a part of the liturgical calendar that really unites these two different areas, the holly. So again, we don't know exactly what this family would have been doing, but we also know that, in Ireland, as in the United States, a lot of the Irish immigrants might have experienced Christmas in a very different way than their parents or grandparents. Due to the ravages of the famine, traditional Irish foodways around the holiday would have been very different from when Bridget and Joseph grew up. And arriving to the United States in a land of abundance, Irish immigrants really took to this emerging American Christmas food traditions and cuisine a lot more than did the Germans and other Irish immigrants. So we know that it was pretty common to cook or to print cookbooks recommending how to cook an entire American Christmas dinner on a budget, right? So this is something that Bridget might be reading, right, to really celebrate her new life in her new home. She's going to really do up this big American Christmas, right? So according to Juliet Corson's 50-cent dinners for families of 6, um, you could make a roast turkey, baked potatoes, applesauce, and plum pudding with cream sauce at a cost of $1. So just in the 1860s and 70s, this is kind of the emerging idea of what an American Christmas is meant to, dinner is meant to be. So I'm going to move along just a little bit faster than I normally would, just because we're kind of running out of time. And I want to bring us into more contemporary Christmas experiences and accounts. So these are 2 pictures of later residents of our block. They're both standing on the roof of their buildings. Josephine and Johnny Baldizzi, whose parents immigrated to the US in 1925 from Sicily. They were born here, they grew up here. By the 1920s and 30s, when they're living in 97 Orchard Street, Christmas has really become what we are used to, right? They would have had Christmas trees and presents and, their Italian parents kind of finding a way to fit in Christmas as they knew it and experienced it with this American Christmas that the kids were experiencing. And to add to all that sort of change, it's the middle of the Great Depression. So Josephine Baldizzi, who we did get to interview as an adult, she told us that in 1930s, during the Depression, her father here, Adolfo, would walk through the streets and he'd find these branches that were left behind from people carrying Christmas trees or Christmas tree stalls where they had kind of trimmed the branches. And he'd gather them up and he'd take them home, and him and his wife would put together this little Christmas tree with the branches they found and some old toys and ornaments and things like that. So we recreated it based on Josephine's memory and put that tree back in the apartment where her and her family actually lived. And the last memory I'm going to actually play so you can hear, this is Ramonita, who her family came to New York City from Puerto Rico in 1955. Her and her 2 boys, Andy and Jose, grew up in 103 Orchard, and they're on the roof of 103 here. And this is Andy, his high school sweetheart, Jenny, who becomes his wife. They get married in 1969. And so she's going to describe a typical Christmas dish that her mother-in-law Ramonita would make, and always insist on making the old-fashioned way. So this is how she made arroz con dulce.
Arroz con dulce. Well, usually they take a little pan and they put in it some water. They put the cloves. They put the cinnamon sticks. They put the ginger, and they put that to boil to get all the juices out of that. And then after, in another pot, they have the coconut milk. You can do it fresh from the coconut. You squeeze the coconut and you get the milk. That's how Ramonita used to do it.
Wow.
Everything she cooked all way.
And
She
where would
used
she get
to
groceries?
Grated coconut.
grate the coconut.
Essex Street, right? Yeah.
Yeah, in the market. They used to grate the coconut, and then, you grate it. You put it in a pot. You add water, and it makes a lot of milk. And then after you put it like in a T-shirt, they used to use a new T-shirt and squeeze it out. Squeeze all the milk from the coconut. And then this juice of the cloves and the cinnamon and the ginger, they used to pour it in that milk
Okay.
to give it that flavor. And they would put it all to boil, and when it would boil, then you pour in the rice. Cooked rice or raw? Raw rice. I tried to make it a couple of times, but it didn't come out. I have to keep trying. Because I have the way to do it, but it doesn't come together like them.
So I also find that is a very common holiday memory of just, oh, this is a great dish. My mom, my grandma, my mother-in-law insisted on making it the old-fashioned way, even though it was much more difficult. And even though she passed on the recipe exactly, it's just never the same, right? Every time I try to make it or someone else, it's just never exactly the same as what she did. But yeah, just wanted to end with some memories of our residents that we actually had the opportunity to speak to and to get their stories. And, you know, just imagining how much Christmas changed in that 100-year period, right, between 1868 and when the Saez Velezes family moved into our building in the 1960s. And just, you know, we are out of time, but I want to give you guys just a last couple minutes to ask some questions or share some thoughts. And um, as you do so, I do want to thank you again for joining us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your own holiday traditions. I always love hearing those stories. But yeah, anything else in the chat, Grace, before we finish?
I mean, yeah, just really great stories being shared. I did put a link into the chat because we always love to put on these free virtual programs. So if you would like to learn more, you can click those links or go to tenement.org. And again, the recording is available upon request. And yeah, have a wonderful holiday season. Stay warm, find some light.
Thank you all so much. Look forward to seeing you at our next virtual or in-person tour. Yeah, thank you very much for coming, everybody. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.